I felt his energy. Everything started to connect. I started to go, "Oh my goodness, like, I used to see this figure that's standing in front of me in this meadow in my mind's eye. I used to see this figure in my bedroom as a child. I used to see this figure in dreams. I used to write about this main character all the time. And I would always write about this character that looked to me like the way that Hades was presenting himself in this guided meditation. And that I just had this like all-encompassing moment, like this like time collapsing moment where I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's why Hades felt so easy and simple. It's because he's always been here and I really am meant to work with him." Welcome back to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. My name is Angelica Crashi. Today, we're going to be talking all about how I started with Hades. And I kind of want to focus on like how we connected, what that experience was like, and give some advice, some takeaways to anybody who might be in a similar situation with Hades in particular. Maybe you're reaching out to Hades, maybe you want to start working with him in a deity work context, or maybe you are just interested in pagan deity work in general at this time, and you kind of want to like hear about how I began working with this deity and how we started this connection. So, this story begins right when I was a sophomore, junior in high school, approximately, maybe like around that time. I think probably junior year in high school, if I'm remembering correctly. We'll kind of back up for context. I was really interested in witchcraft around this time. I'd gotten kind of more specifically fascinated with witchcraft when I was like 12, 13. So for a couple of years now at this time, I had been studying witchcraft. I had been practicing here and there, not very much, but I was intrigued. I wanted to know more. I wanted to read more about it. I remember going in high school, I used to go to Barnes and Noble with my friend, and we would go and we would sit in the spirituality section or the occult section, which even at the time was pretty well stocked. And we would just flip through all the books and go like, "Oh my gosh, what is this? Like, what is going on here? This sounds so fun." She had some information about it that she would teach me. I had some information that I would teach her, and we would just spend like all the time after school reading occult books at the Barnes and Noble. It was like super fun. So, I'd done that for a couple of years. I'd been kind of interested for a couple of years. I remember my mom would take me to Salem every once in a while. We lived in like the greater Boston area at the time, so like in the suburbs of Boston. So we lived pretty close to Salem at the time. And sometimes we would just go like on a day trip, or if it was somebody's birthday, like mine or my sister's birthday, we would say, like, "Oh, let's go to Salem for the day." And we'll go to the witch stores and we'll buy a book or a tarot deck or something. And she was always quite supportive of that, which I really, really appreciate. I know that some moms or caregivers in general are not going to be as permissive, or maybe they just don't, for their own religious trauma reasons or whatever it is, maybe they just aren't as comfortable with their teenage daughters buying like tarot decks and books about the occult. But my mom was always kind of spooky and mystical. I think when she was younger, was a lot more interested in like tarot and crystals and kind of like that almost 70s, 80s like wave of witchcraft. Like this, I call it like the Stevie Nicks witchcraft. Like the people who, like, that was like the witchcraft aesthetic people back in the day. You know what I mean? Like they weren't necessarily in those more tight knit occult communities at the time, but they really like Stevie Nicks. They probably owned a tarot deck, kind of similar to like folks these days who maybe don't identify as witches, but they have like witch items, or, maybe they've done a spell here and there or something like that, right? So that was sort of my mom's energy. She did have this like little broomstick necklace that she got when she was a teenager herself. And she would always wear it and be like, "Yes, broomstick, like I'm a witch too." Like, "You're a witch, I'm a witch." I'm like, "Okay." We can all be witches together. So, I'm really lucky to have her and she was so supportive at the time. There were other things about her that are gonna be told about the story that are maybe not as praiseworthy, but that is something that I really, admired about the way that, she handled raising me and my sister. And I mean, we weren't like really religious at all. We were Catholic, but we were like very, like I call it like Catholic light. Like we were not super intense. My grandmother was kind of the intense one in the family. Like she was the one that was like, I want everybody to get confirmed and their communion and of course baptism. Like she just wanted us to get all the sacraments and that was really important to her. And my mom was just sort of the enforcer of that. But it's funny now because my grandmother passed away in 2009 and right after that like, my grandfather stopped going to church, like, my mom was like, "Oh, thank goodness nobody has to get confirmed, like, anymore, like, if unless they want to." Like, it was really this energy of the only person in the family that really cared is now gone, and so we can all just, like, live our lives, which I thought was super funny, and I remember, like, kind of observing at the time, I wasn't really myself even that interested in Catholicism. I've probably told this story a bunch of times on the podcast, but when I did my first communion, I was like not into it. I could not wrap my head around the idea of original sin, of the fact that I had to confess to a sin in order to like my whole family was watching me walking up to the priest wearing my like wedding outfit, basically like wearing this super fancy outfit. And the whole point of it was I have to tell this random guy like that I did something wrong. Like I thought it was the weirdest thing. And I remember even as a child being like, I don't like this. I can't think of anything that I feel like is wrong inherently with me. And the priest was like, well, have you been mean to your sibling? Like, did you eat dessert before dinner? Like, there has to be something. And I was like, oh, I guess I do those all the time. And he was like, okay, then that's a sin. And you've sinned. And I was kind of like, oh, really? Like, it just didn't feel like real. So that's sort of how I felt about Catholicism, sort of even like leading up to me being interested in paganism and witchcraft, is I just felt a disconnect from it. I think is the best way to describe it. I knew it wasn't right for me. I didn't like the idea of God, like just one God, or even the Trinity. Like I was like, we need more. Like I did not really love that. The only thing I liked about Catholicism was the saints. Like I love the saints. I still love the saints. The saints are like the best. But I loved the saints, and my whole family, even my grandmother, I would say treat their Catholic ideology, I think from more of a folk Catholicism lens. Like we did not have Jesus photos in our home growing up. My grandmother didn't have Jesus really anywhere, but we had a lot of saint statues. We had a lot of saint iconography. I remember my grandmother in particular telling me don't pray to God or Jesus. They're busy. They're like last case scenario. They're miracles only. Pray to the saints because the saints will be the intercession to them. The saints, have their own properties and they can help you with their own, domains. And I remember really early on her specifically telling me just pray to the saints, like just pray to Saint Anthony, she used to always say, because Saint Anthony was like our patron saint as a family. So even my Catholic upbringing, like the most orthodox part of it being my grandmother and her sort of teachings were quite unorthodox compared to sort of the mainstream Catholic Church. It was much more of a folk Catholicism, folk witchcraft kind of vibe with the saints, which I thought was really cool. So that's sort of the religious context that I was raised in. And I guess I wanted to kind of talk about that too, especially since the story kind of involves my mom, like taking me to Salem and just sort of thinking about why that happened and what the religious context was of our family. So I think because we were we were raised, I was raised, my mom was raised in more of this like folk Catholic background. We would walk into shops in Salem and there'd be saints and there'd be plenty of Italian people wearing our horns and, working with tarot cards and working with Archangel Michael and Saint Anthony. And so I think witchcraft felt really almost like homey to my mom, even sort of as more of a Catholic person, like a Catholic woman. And then I really loved it because I loved Greek mythology. Like I was like, "Oh my god, we're walking into the witch stores and there's statues of Hades and Persephone and Zeus." Like that's I love Greek mythology. How cool is this, right? I was kind of more thinking about it from that perspective when I was a kid and when I was a teenager. So that is sort of the context. So I'd been practicing witchcraft, learning about witchcraft for a couple of years. It was around like junior year of high school or so. I've been going to Salem here and there. I started watching YouTube videos about people talking about deity work, about pagan deity work in particular. And I had an awareness at the time that not every witch was a pagan and not every pagan is witch. And like I knew that. I think a lot of the books and a lot of the media, especially like online, that I was engaging in was more Wicca focused or like forward, I guess you could say. So there was kind of an emphasis on deities being a part of the practice, but I remember at the time like understanding that that was Wicca. Like Wicca was a religion. Wicca was sort of this very specific worldview and ideology that involved pagan deities and also involved witchcraft. And it was kind of my first introduction to both in a way. But I think the more that I, heard people talking on YouTube, the more that I learned, the more that I read like more diverse books that just, wasn't just the Cunningham books and stuff like that, the more I started to gain, even at the time, oh, like I can not be Wiccan and still work with deities. I can not be a witch and still work with deities. I can do it all. I can do none of it. And I remember knowing that like not everybody wanted to work with deities. I remember watching some videos. I don't remember like who the creators were because this was so long ago, unfortunately. But I do remember watching some videos around people talking about deity work. I think I was like specifically searching out deity work content. And people were talking about, how lots of people never really like unlock their deities, or not a lot of people want to work with deities. I mean, not I shouldn't say not a lot of people, but you don't have to do it. And I sort of knew that there was no pressure, I think is kind of what I'm trying to convey. But I just felt so drawn to it. And I was like, oh, like out of all of the religious learning that I've done or the religious traditions that I'm familiar with, this feels so homey. I remember like getting so excited about the idea of witchcraft and paganism because of the gods and because that there was sort of a deity aspect to it. I remember not being interested in Catholicism, but knowing that I believed in something. Like I remember sitting in church being like, I don't believe in this. I'm not Catholic. I don't like this. Like, this is definitely isn't me. But I know that, like, I believe that there's something out there. Like, I'm not an atheist. I don't even know if I'm like agnostic necessarily. I know there's something out there. I just haven't figured out the language to describe what I was feeling, is I think the best way to describe it. And so once I heard about pagan deity work as a teenager, I'm like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is 100% the vibe. So from there, I started to think, oh, like, who could be my deity? Okay, I'm going to start doing pagan deity work. Like, who's it going to be? Who's the lucky person that I'm going to choose or whatever. And that was kind of hard for me. Like I remember at first being like, there's so many. Who do I choose? Like I just felt really overwhelmed. So if you felt overwhelmed or if you feel overwhelmed right now, I just want to like tell you that I think it's just inevitable. I think everybody just kind of feels overwhelmed at the beginning of this journey because it is such a big journey, and it's such a big thing to just decide that you're going to try out this religion, especially paganism or neo-paganism or sort of any type of like eclectic pagan belief, because it is really DIY. Like it is really just you trying things out and experimenting. You don't like walk into a church like you can with other religions and just be like, "Oh, this is what's happening here," right? And I know that a lot of religions have like a barrier to entry and, Christianity's not really like that, but others are. And I think paganism is interesting because it doesn't necessarily have like a barrier to entry in terms of like, you need to take this class or you need to go through this baptismal process or you need to like learn about our religion or you need to like go through this whole initiation like, that those are like religious traditions and there are pagan traditions like that where you have to be initiated and things like that. But I think like solitary eclectic paganism and witchcraft doesn't have a barrier to entry in terms of like you can just stroll into it and be like, I'm gonna do this and let's go. But it kind of has a barrier to entry in the fact that like you have to educate yourself about what that journey looks like and you have to be experimental and you have to be willing to try something that's probably going to feel new and strange and weird to you, and sometimes that can be overwhelming or it can take people like years to get into. And I think even just like resources, like finding the right resources, learning from people that you resonate with, applying knowledge that is good knowledge, all of that kind of stuff, getting advice about it, like just hearing about it, like I think is really helpful. So I just kind of want to extend that to any of you who might be feeling that way. And yeah, it is an interesting kind of pagan phenomenon. But with Hades, I felt this immediate draw to him that was already present even before I considered a pagan deity work context. I remember vividly thinking, who could my first deity be? And like the first word that came into my mind was Hades. The first name that came into my mind was Hades. And it was sort of one of those things where I was like, okay, this is the first name that came into my head. That probably means something. But at the same time, am I gonna pick the first wedding dress I tried on? Am I gonna pick the first prom dress? Like, am I gonna like, that was kind of the vibe, like, shouldn't I really just investigate more about deity work before I go, "Yep, okay, let's do it, Hades." So that's was my attitude. I was like, let's, like, really see what the vibes are here. Let's see if anybody else shows up, basically. So, I remember just, like, putting out the feelers, generally speaking, to deity, to pagan deity. I was more interested in the Greek pantheon in particular, so I was kind of putting out the feelers for the Greek pantheon. I was doing a ton of research. I remember like every day after school or like every, time I had off, I would do some research about a deity of the Greek pantheon, even like more obscure deities. And I would just try to kind of go, does this resonate with me? How do I feel about this person? That sort of thing, right? And I was kind of like looking for the feeling of like, do I feel like this person connects to me? Do I feel like I maybe already have an existing relationship? Because that was sort of the advice that I was getting at the time from other creators that came before me talking about deity work in terms of like research and see what happens, see how you feel, maybe call out to a deity that you feel really connected to and see if they reciprocate, notice signs. I was like looking up all the signs of every deity, like Hades is okay, black keys and, black animals and dogs and roosters and the Biden and cypress trees. And like, I was like looking up all the stuff, pomegranates. And I was like, okay, did I see any of that in the wild today? It's silly when I think about it looking back. But, I was doing that kind of thing with basically the whole pantheon, trying to figure out who my deity was. I remember I was potentially like interested in Artemis, but then I kind of decided like as I started to approach goddesses that for whatever reason I wasn't that interested in goddess energy at that time. This is kind of funny. I don't think I've heard anybody say this before. I feel like I'm completely alone in this. And so if you agree with me, and again, you don't have to agree with me, but if you've experienced this, like DM me on Instagram because I would love to hear that somebody felt the same way as me. And basically the way that I felt was at the time when I was a teenager, I felt really disconnected from goddess energy, from divine feminine energy in general. I wasn't interested really in working with goddesses. I'd reached out to Persephone and to Artemis, and I didn't feel a connection to either of them. Here's Persephone now. We do work together now. But it took us a long time to make contact. And yeah, I felt like there was like a veil, like there was like a brick wall in between me and Persephone. And I felt kind of a similar energy with Artemis where like she was a little bit more receptive. Like I could almost like feel her energy when I would call her into the room or when I would do a card pull. I could kind of understand the messages that she was giving me. But all of her messages were like, I'm not the one for you. Like I will tell you that, but I'm not the one. And then with Persephone, I just got nothing. Like, I feel like I could not get her to talk to me at all. Which I think now, like looking back, I'm like, now, so many years later, Persephone reached out to me, like almost like 10 years after this story of when I was like 15, 16. 10 years later, when I was 25, Persephone reached out to me and we, started connecting. So just because the deity doesn't immediately reciprocate doesn't mean that you can't ever work with them. I think in the case of Persephone, now what I know now, like I connected with her because when I got married, I got married when I was 25. And when I got married, I just felt like this huge rush of goddesses in my life. I was gifted a statue when I got married from a friend of a marriage goddess from a pantheon that they worked with, and they wanted me to have it sort of like as a potential, not like as a you have to work with this person in a deity work context now, but like put the statue in your house, and if the goddess comes through, then she comes through, and she's from my tradition, and I just wanted to like share that with you. And so I thought that was really sweet present. And I started working with that goddess, or I started kind of feeling her out. And then I started getting messages from another goddess like a couple months after I got married. And then Persephone started coming in. I just had like this sudden like goddess divine feminine like wave. It was like super funny. So I think that the reason that I felt that veil when I was a teenager is I just needed to be older, or I needed to maybe go through more initiation in my, feminine life, I guess. I don't know. It's not everybody. I definitely don't want to like sit here and say that you can't work with the divine feminine until you get married, because that is not true, and it's not the case for everybody, and it's not even going to be an accessible thing to do for everyone. But it was just my experience, and I thought it was really interesting. So now knowing what I do now, that's sort of why I couldn't reach out to Persephone, is I was meant to reach out to her and experience her after I got married, after that milestone had happened. So because I was kind of like getting these brick walls with the goddesses, I was like, let me like go back to Hades, because Hades was the one that I immediately was like, he is just coming through when I think of a deity that I can work with in the deity work context. So I decided that I was going to officially reach out to Hades. I was going to do a meditation with Hades. But I also wanted to have a second option on the table again, because I was like, it can't be Hades because it's just so obvious. Like it almost seemed too obvious to me. I'm like, I vibe with Hades. I feel like we have similar energies. I really respect him. Like I just really liked his energy. I don't know what it was. I loved it even from that time. And I just figured that it was too simple if it was Hades. So I guess my other tip is if it feels perfect and just right and too easy, it's not too good to be true. Like, it might actually be the fact that you have just been walking with this deity for so long that, like, maybe in past lives, maybe in your current life, and you just didn't realize, and their energy just feels so perfect, and it feels so comfortable because they've been with you, and it's not too easy, it's not too simple, it's not too good to be true, it's just what was meant to happen, you know? So I decided to create a second deity connection. Like I decided to reach out to another deity, and I'd be like, okay, Hades and somebody else, and we'll sort of compare my connection with them, or we'll see which one wants to work with me more, or whatever, which one I like better, which one actually comes through if maybe neither of them will. And so the other deity was Odin. I don't know why I chose Odin. I think I chose Odin because I think a lot of people were working with him, and so he was just an easy like, "Oh, yeah, Odin, classic." Nice classic pagan deity. You know? I also really did like his mythology. I think his mythology is so cool. I love Odin. I don't work with him. I never worked with him. Spoiler alert, he didn't come through for me. It didn't work. But I think his energy is so cool, and I think I've picked up on his energy for clients before, but I've never, like, felt him coming into my life. But yeah, I love him. He's so cool. So I think I just decided to put him in there. I think it was because he's like the god of poetry and writing and language, and I just liked that because I liked writing. So I was like, oh, maybe Odin. So I did a meditation with both of them. I started with Odin again because I think knew Hades was going to come through. So I was like, let's start with Odin first, right? Let's start with him first, see what happens. Nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens. I'm meditating. I did like a guided deity meditation that I found on YouTube, like something like, find your pagan deity meditation or something like that. It might have even been just a blank like meditation where it led you into like a meadow, because for both of the meditations I did the same one, and it kind of guided you visually into a meadow, into like a specific place, and the deity would either be there or the meadow would be empty or something like that. So I remember doing the meditation with Odin and nothing was happening, nothing was showing up, and I really felt disconnected from it. And then a couple of days later, I did the same meditation with Hades. And this is so funny. What ended up happening was before I even got into the meadow. So I'm like walking through a forest, and once you got into the meadow, like that was supposed to be when the deity would either be there or not be there, or somebody would be there. As I'm walking through this forest in this guided meditation, I see like a figure behind a tree. And I was like, who the heck is this person? So I remember like turning and like being inquisitive in the guided meditation, and it was Loki. And Loki was like, "Hey, I just wanted to catch you. I know you were kind of trying to get in touch with Odin, and I don't know if you're trying to get in touch with him again, but I would like to work with you. I don't think Odin's coming through for you, but I would like to work with you, and I think our energy could be really cool. And I felt you reaching out to Odin, and I felt him not answer, and I just wanted to extend my arm essentially." And I was like, "Oh, Loki, interesting." Like I remember being like, "Hmm, fascinating." And I was saying to myself, I was like, "Well, I meditated with Odin the other night and nothing came through. And now I'm meditating trying to connect with Hades, and like Loki's showing up, almost like stopping me from the altar, like, "Hey, look at me." Like, "No, work with me." That was kind of the vibe. And I was so intrigued, and I was like, "That is so fascinating that all of that." Like, I just thought it was so interesting. But I said to him, "I'm not really interested in working with you. I'm sorry. I'm not interested." I remember just expressing that to him, and he was really disappointed and was like, "Oh, okay, well, let me know in the future, I guess. Like, whatever." And I walked away, and I walked forward and into the meadow, and I saw Hades. And it was so obvious that it was Hades standing there. I felt his energy. Everything started to connect. I started to go, "Oh my goodness, like I used to see this figure that's standing in front of me in this meadow in my mind's eye. I used to see this figure in my bedroom as a child. I used to see this figure in dreams. I used to write about this main character all the time when I was a child and when I was a teenager. I was really interested in like, I did like NaNoWriMo every year, and I wrote a lot of short stories. And I would always write about this character that looked to me like the way that Hades was presenting himself in this guided meditation. And that I just had this like all-encompassing moment, like this like time collapsing moment where I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's why Hades felt so easy and simple. It's because he's always been here, and I really am meant to work with him." And so we chatted briefly in the guided meditation. And then a couple of days later, I did another meditation, and I was like chanting, and I opened up a ritual space. And that's when I felt his energy come in, like, physically into the room, like, into the ritual space. Like, I cast a circle. I kind of learned my lesson after the Loki thing. I wasn't utilizing circles when I was doing those meditations, and I kind of realized, oh, the reason why Loki was able to perceive the fact that I was, like, reaching out to Odin was because I didn't cast a circle, and I was like, what other entities might have picked up on the fact that I was just reaching out, touching me, touching you. I'm sorry, I'm from Boston. It just happens sometimes. You just sing Sweet Caroline, it just happens. But anyway, I decided, okay, for my second Hades, you know, hello ritual, I'm going to cast a circle and really set up a ritual space. And I'm going to kind of try to do like an invocation. That's basically what my goal was. And I very, very successfully invoked him. And I utilized chanting. And it's something that I still teach when I teach Hades devotees, because I think that there's just something about chanting that's very thonic. And I think chanting is great for any deity, but I was chanting his name and I just felt that, like, click in the evocation of Hades. I just felt like the chanting really called him up from the underworld, and he showed up in my space, and I felt like this hot wind all around me. I felt like literally visceral physical experience of wind, like me caught in this wind tunnel. I felt this I almost like in my mind's eye as that was happening, I saw this like mine shaft. I had my eyes closed. I saw this mine shaft and I felt like in my mind's eye, I was going deeper and deeper and deeper into the mines. And I had this like physical reaction of swirling wind around me. It was the most intense physical spiritual experience I ever had. This is it was around when I was 17, 18. I since have never had such a visceral spiritual experience. I think it's because Hades, because I've heard this with a lot of other devotees. If this doesn't happen to you, by the way, don't feel bad. There's nothing wrong with you. I think there's something wrong with me that I was able to feel this because it's very rare. Okay, I just want to like put that out there. It's very rare. Doesn't mean anything if you don't feel like physical visceral sensation with the deity. Okay, I want everybody to know that. But I feel like Hades does pull stunts whenever he wants to really reach out to a deity in a big way and sort of ask for devotion. And for me, it just happened to be like right away because we'd been connecting for a long time, because I think our energies in general are so connected, and that may or may not be the case for you with your deity. I think that every deity connection is so different, and that's just sort of how I felt with Hades was like, "Oh my goodness, this is such a perfect connection and I already feel your energy so viscerally and so intensely in my life, and it's just incredible." But I do think Hades pulls stunts more often than other deities because I think he really wants to sort of either I don't know if it's a convincing thing or he just really wants to go like, "Hey, hi, I am here. I do exist and I am reaching out to you." And I also think he's just a very powerful god. Like, I do think that some energy of some deities are going to be more powerful. And I find that chthonic deities in particular, because I work with another chthonic deity who I've had some other, like, very physical, spiritual sensations with. And I've had like paranormal moments that other people have witnessed even with this deity. Lots of them actually, like so many. And so I do think that there's something with the chthonic gods. Maybe they're more terrestrial, they're more associated with the earthly realm, which is true. Like even in the Greek pantheon, like the gods of Olympus are sort of like of the spheres and of the sky and the celestial world. And like yeah, they can come down here and communicate with us, but the chthonic gods are the gods of the earth. They're terrestrial. They're here. They're in the earthly realm, they're with us. And so I think like gods like Persephone and Gaia and Demeter, and even though Demeter is an Olympian technically. Hades, Hecate, I would say in particular the chthonic ones, like Hades, Hecate in particular, are quite visceral in their energies because potentially because of their terrestrial associations. But yeah, I just noticed that, like, with Phonic deity in particular, with Hades in particular, there's just very commonly some type of visceral experience, whether that be in your dreams or elsewhere. And it's because, like, his energy can really impact this realm, even a lot more than some other gods. So I don't know. It's just something that I noticed. And it's something that I notice hearing a lot of stories from Hades devotees. I've talked to like hundreds of Hades devotees at this point, and a lot of them describe something very similar. Uh, a lot of them also describe that heat, that feeling of like heat and hotness that I felt. I felt that hot wind around me. And that is also quite common in terms of sometimes the room just heats up. I notice that, like, when I evoke Hades now, the room will just heat up. Like the summertime, I'm like, okay, Hades, we got to turn the AC on in here. Like, it's like a little hot. It's like a little too much. But there's something to that as well. And yeah, it's fascinating. So that was my ritual experience with Hades. I felt so connected to him right away. And then I was like, damn, let's go. I'm a Hades girl. Like, I knew immediately. Like, I was like, let's do it. And that's how I started working with Hades. That is our relationship. I think from there, I just tried to learn everything I could about him. I tried to create like a weekly practice with him. I put his altar on my vanity, which was so cute. It's like my makeup and my Hades altar. It's just girly things, right? I felt bad. I was like, Hades is surrounded by makeup and pink, and I had like a pink, pastel pink room at the time, and I'm like, he probably just hates it in here, but I think he enjoyed it. I think he was okay with it. I think he was like, "Yeah, maybe black would be better, but I can deal with this." And yeah, I remember, like, talking to him when I was at my vanity, when I was at my altar. I would involve him in a lot of my spells and rituals. I did a spell maybe about like a year, 2 years or so after finding this deity. I was in college at the time, and I did a spell to manifest money for books because one semester in college, I think it was like one of my first semesters, I had to buy a ton of books because it was like random prerequisite classes and language textbooks and just like random stuff that I had to buy, like textbook wise. I was an English major, so my books were not expensive. It was like Charles Dickens. Like, you can buy it for $4 on thrift books or something, right? But the textbooks were more expensive. So there was one semester where I was like, Hades, help me manifest $500 because that's how much I'm going to need to spend on books this semester. And your girl needs the cash, right? And yeah, I did this spell. I baked him chocolate cupcakes, which intuitively I just felt like maybe he would want. And I offered the cupcakes to him and I asked for the money. So it was a very simple petition spell. And within 30 minutes, it was so crazy. I got an email from my college and they were like, hey, you have a mysterious book advance for $500. Yeah, here it is. It literally, the email had no, like, it wasn't marked with my college's name. It was like from my college, but it was just like a random unmarked email that was like, you have a book advance at the library, or not the library, at the bookstore. And I went into the bookstore and was like, do I have a book advance? Like, what's going on? Because book advances were for like folks who qualified, or I think if you had like a certain status with the university, you could achieve one or something like that. I'm not even really sure how you get them because I never got one ever again. It was only that one semester that I did that spell. So after that, and after that spell went so well, and I did have the book advance, and I got to buy $500 worth of books in the library. It was literally $500, the exact amount that I asked Hades for. It was so crazy. One of my favorite spell result stories because it was literally instantaneous, happened immediately, and it was so visceral. And it was also during an eclipse. I, as an astrologer now, Eclipses are one of those things where we really urge people not to do magic on eclipses just because the nature of manifestation can sometimes be skewed during the eclipses because of what's going on with the luminaries. However, I've had some great eclipse magic experiences, and that's one of them. And it was literally my most like, the spell that was so obviously, like, cast and came true, and it happened so immediately, and it was just so, like, undeniable. It was so paranormal. Like, sometimes you do a spell and, like, it came true, like, you got the result, but it doesn't come in such a magical way of, like, I literally get a random unmarked email that says I can now buy $500 worth of books. Like, that was just so fucking cool and, like, insane to me and magical, and it was on an eclipse, so I don't know. I think if you wanna believe that your magic isn't gonna work on eclipses, it won't. Or you can just, if you have to do magic on an eclipse, you can believe that it will work. So, anyway, a brief tangent about eclipse magic. But anyway, we'll kind of bring this episode to a close. That is how I started working with Hades and a little bit about the first couple of workings and years and spells that I did with him. It was such a fun experience finding him. Working with other deities, like finding other deities, I remember feeling really frustrated with because Hades was the only deity I worked with up until 2022 when I got married. 2021, I met one other deity, and then 2022 when I got married is when the majority of my deities started coming in. And now I have a bigger spirit team. I have more deities that I work with. I work with Persephone, I work with another chthonic deity that I just keep unnamed for our connection's sake. I work with Hades, of course. Those are kind of my three main deities, but there's certain deities that I have connections with, like that are more acquaintance based. And yeah, like I remember feeling frustrated by the evolution of my deity work journey because literally until 2021 I only had Hades. He was the only one that I would connect with, the only deity that I really wanted to work with. Like I reached out to other deities and I didn't feel their connection as much. I didn't feel it as strongly as I did with Hades. I feel like I can't talk today. It's Mercury retrograde all over the place. I feel like I keep tripping over my words. But yeah, it was just kind of a frustrating experience, like, all of those years, like, literally, like, 2016, 2015 till 2021. Nothing. Nobody except for Hades, right? So, I just wanna encourage you that if you feel stuck with deity work, if you like to hear these stories because you wanna know what it's like to work with deity, you're trying to reach out to them, maybe you're trying to add a deity into your life, it can take time, and I think a lot of the time it's really not up to you. It kind of is up to, like, the divine timing of things. I think it's not even, like, necessarily up to the deity either. It's just like if the time is right, if both of you are interested, if the deity knows it can come in and teach you something, if you are open to that message and, maybe have achieved some milestone in your life or initiation experience that is obvious or subtle that allows the connection to start, I think it's sort of this magical process of two beings finding out that they're right for each other and starting this connection. So I think that, I would really urge you not to feel super frustrated and just to remember that, like, when you live your life, just let your life unfold, work with your current spirit team, you know, practice your magic, learn about deity work, really try to grow in your magical practice as much as you can. And maybe if deity work is not working for you, just grow in other areas and learn about devotion and theurgy and like all of these things that can be really helpful when you approach a deity practice eventually. And then just be open to the opportunity of it happening or it coming in or of the connection sort of finally clicking, right? I'm sure there's so many examples in your life of friends or people or romantic relationships where it was very obvious that it was not right at a certain time in your life, but then you reconnected later, or you maybe disconnected later and you were like, "Oh, they're not a match for me anymore," or "Now they are a match for me." The same thing happens in deity work, and for some reason, because they're like disembodied intelligences, we start to be like, "Is it my fault? What am I doing wrong?" And it's like, "You're not doing anything wrong." You know? Like, most of the time, you're not doing anything wrong. It's just divine timing needs to come in and link you to the right person, or maybe you've already found the right deity, but divine timing needs to come in and solidify your connection more or stitch back your connection. You can have timelines and situations with deities where you grow apart and then you come back together. It's very similar to relationships. And a lot of it has to do with teaching and what you can learn from each other and how you work together and all of those things. And sometimes once you've experienced and learned from a deity and really sort of absorbed a ton of information from a deity, sometimes, not always, sometimes that deity will leave your life and go, "Hey, you did it. You graduated." Like, that's like all I can teach you. And, you can still call upon me and we're still here, but like, you don't need to give me daily offerings anymore. You don't need to, really work on this relationship with me. We can just sort of exist. We can just sort of be old acquaintances. We can connect whenever or not at all. So, that is how I started working with Hades. I hope this episode is really fascinating for you. I hope you enjoyed it. Go follow me over on Instagram. I post daily stories on Instagram. I'm always over there. I post a ton of extra content, like short form reels content and other types of content on Instagram. So, highly recommend, if you haven't followed me over there, go for it. I'm on Instagram at Angelica S. Crazy. And all of the stuff is going to be in the show notes too, as well, or in like the YouTube description. Right now, I am so excited to announce that I am coming out with a pack of thonic guided meditations. So, for the Greek pantheon, I have created meditations for almost all of the pagan chthonic deities from the Greek pantheon. So, Persephone, Hecate, Hades, Thanatos, Morpheus. I've got a lot of deities in this pack of connecting with the chthonic gods. I also have a meditation that's all about just exploring the Greek underworld. So, if you are somebody who wants to start working with a deity of the Greek underworld, maybe it's Hades, maybe it's another deity, maybe you just want to experience the energy of all of the deities of the Greek underworld, you want to kind of see who's going on for you, maybe you want to have an experience like I had, where you want to meditate with Odin, meditate with Hades. Odin's not included. Wouldn't that be funny if I just put Odin in there just randomly as like it's like, Brat, you know how the album Brat is like, it's Brat, but it's an extra song, so it's not Brat, or like whatever the meme structure is. I should do that with Odin. I should just stick Odin in as like, just you had to watch the podcast episode to figure out why he's in there because it makes no sense for him to be in there otherwise. But this is coming out very soon. You can pre-order right now if you want, and there's going to be like the full list of meditations and the links of them and everything up there. So pre-record it right now. The link is going to be in the show notes. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed our episode today. Follow me on Instagram, pre-record the Underworld meditation set, and we will talk very soon. Bye.